How does one become a victim like me? Why and what? It's not so easy to answer. I was born in Sudbury, Ontario district in Canada, which is a bleak but famous for nickel mining area under the shadow of industrial pollution. A healthy, happy baby. September 1941, Verner, Ontario, on my mother's parents' farm, my grandparents. The birth was apparently difficult. It was unusual for a doctor to be called in. My mother was in labor too long, so her father took his horse and buggy into Verner, 2 miles east of the farm, to get a local doctor. My grandparents told me the story, saying the doctor could find nothing wrong, and he told my grandparents, "This child does not want to be born." Ominous prediction. Our home was in Sudbury. It's a very dirty industrial mining town and with one of the world's largest smelter and super stacks operation of nickel and precious metals. The air is so contaminated, the landscape surrounded the city was black and bleak and burnt out by sulfuric acid poisoning. 1969 astronauts from NASA did the moonwalk exercises here. That is our one claim to fame. Today the landscape has changed a great deal, but not much has changed in the people. Violence in the home, raping of children, police apathy, legal and court corruption so rampant it's considered normal. At the age of 6, I was poisoned by sulfuric acid. There was a leak at the smelter, and both my father's mother and I collapsed in the driveway. She never fully recovered either. My condition was made worse, as from that day on, by toxic chemicals, air, food, and water in beverages. Despite the painful agony of daily migraines and sudden crippling attacks, stomach convulsions, making eating very difficult, I loved learning in school. Unlike most children of my generation, I was barred from sports due to unpredictable crippling attacks, so I spent a great deal of time reading. I loved learning and school. But unlike most children of my generations, I was barred from sports due to the unpredictable crippling attacks. By age 7, I had completed reading everything in the children's library and got permission to take books from the adult library. I had read every history book in their library and I had nothing left to read. I distinctly recall my first book was psychology. I wanted to understand the insanity of the human species, for it had already become very clear to me that for some reason we didn't make any sense. That's me, age 7. Kind of cute, eh? If I don't say so myself. For the rest of my public school years, I sang in the choir, danced entertaining at family functions despite the painful migraines. By age 8 or 9, I discovered if I did not eat, I could function at a much higher level physically. I was a child protege on the piano. My father killed that. I gave it up. And by the age of 12, I lost my singing voice. Looking back, it was obviously due to allergies, and I had to quit. I had difficulty climbing anything. My body felt like 500 pounds of granite rock, racked with pain. Cold and ice made me better. In cold air, my breathing and legs were always stronger in snowy winter. I had balance difficulties, but very lucky to have a boy living across the street, Ronnie, who would skate with me and help me get my exercise year-round, walking and climbing hills and swimming with me. He was my protector as a child. Needless to say, it became routine in winter once Mum was asleep to put me asleep for me to go and get my little snowsuit on and go outside and roll in the snow because it took the pain down. Now, despite my father, Nick Upchan's extreme, violent, abusive, sadistic behavior, it was the one thing he did for me as a child. He understood that ice and snow reduced my pain. So when he saw I was not in bed, he would bribe me to come in by promising to have ice cream with me if I came in. I did my homework inside my closet with a flashlight because light increased the pain. My mother was a psychotic personality who chose to ignore my chronic illness and pain by refusing to allow me to have blinds on my bedroom windows. And the light was blinding, and so I had to do my homework in my closet. She also tried to force me to eat, which resulted in screaming arguments. Nick would turn into a rage and try to beat me up, or sometimes defend me and beat her up or attack my brother. My childhood was a nightmare of brutal cruelty, with scattered wonderful memories of being rescued by neighbors who would allow me to sleep over with their children, baking cookies that did not make me sick. Looking back, Mrs. Marshall was old-fashioned and used lard or butter, no newfangled margarine for her. Mrs. Oystrick, Ronnie's mom, was Ukrainian, and her cooking also did not make me sick. I think she used only butter. My French great-grandmother, or my French grandmother, Adrian, never made me sick either. I was well only on their farm, but never in Sudbury, Ontario, where we lived. My mother's cooking especially always made me sick. She worked full-time and had no time to cook the old-fashioned way, which is one reason I was always more sick in Sudbury. Nick was a junk food addict, and that surely did me a great deal of harm. His mother lived with us, and sometimes her cooking did not make me sick, and yet sometimes it did. After researching myself, I now know that I was the victim at age 6 of sulfuric acid fallout from the giant smelter Inco, now Vale, smokestack, and an abundance of fast foods, including rapeseed oil, alias canola oil, chemical additives hidden in Canadian food, not identified in food labels, plus gas, oil, and diesel poisoning from vehicles. On my grandparents' farm, they did not use pesticides or chemicals of any kind. They did not intentionally create an organic farm. It was just what they had been doing since 1636, a method of farming that each row of plant was different, and each bug that was attracted to it was controlled by bugs, worms, and birds and snakes and attracted to that particular species of plant. The snakes also played a very large role in keeping the plants healthy. I forget what they ate, but Grandma cautioned me to never kill a garter snake. They protected the garden. To this day, I love to see a garter snake. I think they're beautiful. And of course, that's why I never got sick on the farm. Once back in the city, I was eating food laced with pesticides and God knows what, and the air was toxic for hundreds of miles around. That's a picture of Sandra, the one and only true friend I had in Sudbury. I had other friends, but they weren't really true friends. And she was my best pal, but she had been raped by her father. And a neighbor's a couple of blocks away, the wife was being raped repeatedly by a drunken maniac, which made her pregnant. But I always think of Sandra. Hers was a very tragic story. I know she's in heaven with one of the angels. She was a very, very beautiful, beautiful girl and brilliant. She didn't even open a book and she would pass with 100% all through high school. Despite the agony of pain every day, I graduated from a business course at the age of 16, typed 100 words a minute, and shorthand 80 words a minute. I had photogenic memory. I was fashionable and attractive. I was trained as a model, and was hired immediately at City Hall by Joe Fabro, the mayor, as a public relations secretary. A convention was coming to Sudbury with politicians from all over the United States coming to stay here. I'm a born extrovert and I love to research, and that made me perfect for the position. I was published in the Sudbury Star many times. Despite my disabilities, I hid the pain and I endured it in silence. And I worked twice as hard and I made it through high school. And Mayor Joe Fabro was wonderful to me. I purposely omit my teen years, modeling and the two men who raped me, one at 16 and the other at 17. One spring day, I met Bob Temple, and the connection between us was instant. I'm going to, yeah, I have to change the picture here. Sorry, but I've got to change this. Oh, it's not easy to do. I'm not a professional, as you can see. Okay, now this thing got caught. Here we go. Come on. Whoops. Oh, God. I wish I had somebody to help me that was a pro. Well, that's as good as it'll get. Okay. Sorry about that, people. Anyway, I was certainly quite attractive, but I don't think that's a reason somebody should rape me, do you? Anyway, one day I met Bob Temple, and the connection between us was absolutely instant. It was as if we'd known each other for 1,000 years. We fully expected to be married one day in the future. October 1960, Bob took me by the hand, put me on the motorcycle, picked me up. It must have been a Saturday afternoon because I was working full time, and took me to Moonlight Beach. And he sat me down and he said that we would never be able to be married, that he was going to die soon. And I don't mind telling you that I was in complete shock as I listened to him tell my story. And he told me the story of my life, what would happen to me. And he warned me about Sudbury, and he especially warned me about my mother. I went home, I changed, there was a party, well, sort of a party, just a little gathering of teenagers, you know. I was 19, and he was 23. And he said he wanted to go and clear his head. He had a migraine, so I didn't think anything of it. Next morning, got a phone call. He was dead. He'd been killed by a drunk driver. He'd been thrown through a barbed wire fence. 40 feet beyond, they found his head. He was decapitated. I was never the same after that. Joe Fabro tried to rescue me from the violence and the abuse I was enduring in Sudbury society, and he urged me to leave Sudbury and go to Toronto, where I'd be appreciated for my brilliant analytical brain skills that apparently were quite rare. Mr. Fabro taught me what was important in the world of real estate investments. When I tried, my mother wept, begging me not to leave her, so I held back. That is until one fatal night when I was the victim of a plot to gang rape me, having drugged me at work. I was working for a Toronto construction magnate, part-time. My escape was nothing short of a movie plot. On the disguise of taking me to dinner at a local hotel where he booked a room, once inside he attacked me as several men stood around the room laughing and waiting their turn. But I was never a good victim. I fought like a wild tiger. At the age of 7, my father, and I bit him so hard he had to go to the hospital for a tetanus shot. So I fought this monster off like a wild animal in a rage, screaming and pushing him so hard he fell to the floor. Running to the door, screaming. Finding it locked, I pounded and jumped up and down and screamed for help. A bellhop quickly arrived, opening the door to set me free. He recognized me when I came in because he was my brother. Frank was never much of a friend to me, but he did do that. Taking a taxi home, that was it. I screamed at my mother. Joe was right. I'm getting the hell out of here. I called the train station and booked the train to Toronto the next morning and hastily packed a suitcase. By the time my father returned from work, I was on the train. I had done a number of, that's just another one of the Sudbury stars, not important. I did a lot of modeling before I left, but I was walking around in the days. I vowed never to return. I have a vague recollection that someone had told me to get out of Sudbury, but it never came back to me what Bob had said to me, what the city would do to me. And as I stared out the window on the train, it was just a vague dream. I could not remember very much. It was 1961, and shortly after I arrived in Toronto, I was seduced and date raped by a man I thought loved me because he said he did it because he loved me. Now you got to understand that is what my mother taught me to believe. Unlike my mother, I was not so forgiving. He deliberately got me pregnant. But yes, after every rape, she told me that the reason they did it is because they loved me. You can well imagine what that did to me, psychologically, emotionally, and in every sense of the word. Mutilated my ability to make sane decisions where men were concerned. Anyhow, my father arranged an abortion, but I refused it. Truth was, I enjoyed my pregnancy. Those 9 months were the only time I was pain-free. I have no idea why being pregnant helped my immune system somehow. I leave that explanation to the experts, or it was just another of God's miracle. I don't know. In 1962, in full bloom, I met John Wayne. He stopped a parade on Yonge Street to talk to me. He came over and he put his head on my belly and felt the kick, laughing, and said, "You're going to have a boy for sure." He was such a beautiful, handsome man in person, and he gave me a gift of his compassion that's lasted a lifetime. I dearly loved my son, yet I gave him up with the true mother's love for adoption when he was about 8 months old. It took me that long to find the kind of parent that I wanted for him. I was just too sick to take care of him, and I didn't want my son anywhere near my abusive family or his immoral father. I cut George off sex and never forgave him for what he did entirely. After that, we were celibate friends. It would be 2 years before I was well enough to work full time. The one thing George did was take full responsibility by financially taking care of my bills during that period. I did a little modeling, again, just for fun, something to do. But I never really wanted to do it full time. I had offers, of course, to go to New York, but I didn't want to. I don't know why. Eventually, George was disgusted with my female doctor, who was very cruelly indifferent to my suffering. And that's a whole other story of prejudice I won't go into. But she treated me like I was not worth keeping alive. He found me Dr. Keltz, and he discovered that that bitch had left the afterbirth in me, and it was a miracle it did not kill me, but it was poisoning me. I had to wear pads 24/7 as gut gushed out of me for 2 years, and the stench was revolting. Dr. Keltz arranged a D&C cleanout, and I had a remarkable quick recovery for a while. Having excellent typing and shorthand skills, well educated, jobs came easy. 1964, I took another attack. A man found me wandering on the streets and rescued me. And managed to get me home. A cab driver once found me, took me home. During one attack that I wasn't able to get back to my feet, Ronnie Farah, who is now a very dear friend, he came over and he helped to cheer me up, dress me up in a beautiful gown, fixed my hair and makeup, and carried me out to a taxi cab. He had a surprise for me, he said. The cab arrived outside a lovely hotel, and Ron had arranged with the staff to have me meet Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, who were staying there. There are no words to describe that meeting. She instinctively felt I was in pain, and in her whispery voice offered to help me. Foolishly, I replied nothing could be done. Dr. Gelt said it was genetic. I believed him for 23 years, but in truth he had lied to me. It is true that children are being born like me because their parents are poisoned and pass on to their children a genetic predisposition, but I was not born with it. I was perfectly healthy until the age of 6, when I was poisoned the first time by sulfuric acid. From then on, I would take sudden attacks, and then just as sudden, never knowing why or how, I would suddenly recover, but only temporarily. I was in and out of these attacks. If it hadn't have been for my excellent education and my unbelievable skills in business, I would have never worked. I would have been considered handicapped. But despite the handicaps and despite the migraines and despite the crippling attacks, I was so brilliant that I was never truly out of work for 23 years in Toronto. I was always in demand. Employers and people just put up with my being ill. 1966, I took another attack, and this time I paralyzed completely. I crawled to the phone and was taken by ambulance to the Mount Sinai Hospital. Where Dr. Wallfish did a research study on me for 2 months. And in the end, he found absolutely nothing wrong. Well, why would he find anything wrong? They weren't looking for poisoning, and we didn't have the test to test for the problem. So what the heck? Of course they found nothing wrong. Why would they? If they did diagnose chemical poisoning properly, industry would be forced to control products, cars, trucks, and machines that poison the air. Food industry would have to stop using toxic pesticides and toxic chemical additives to our foods. Bayer would go bankrupt fighting the lawsuits that Monsanto would be responsible for. Rapeseed oil, alias canola oil, would have stayed banned in the United States, and maybe Health Canada's corrupt executives would be in jail. Oh, yes, the glory of hindsight. But I was not privy to any of that information at the time. I would be struck by paralyzing attacks without warning, like lightning, mind-boggling pain, memory loss, blackouts for days or months, profuse bleeding, infection spread through my frail body like a prairie on fire. My life was beyond my ability to control. I spent the next 20 years of my life picking up the fragmented pieces of myself, splattered amongst the tattered spoils of a career in shambles, amid the rubble of financial chaos, in a gruesome battle for survival, with no medical treatment or even a true diagnosis of my disease. It's true that my life was a diabolical nightmare. There's no question about it. And it's very hard for me to describe those each decade. I continuously struggled for success only to be robbed of life's pleasures by another catastrophic attack. I woke up in Vancouver with a lesbian biker gang taking very good care of me, feeding me homemade chicken soup. They, and with the help of an unemployed pimp, he had no hooker at the time, carried me in and out of the Vancouver hospital too many times to count. While there, I rescued a girl who had been raped by her father and was pregnant. I tried working as a bunny girl, but frankly, the pay was lousy, the men rude, and I hated Vancouver. Specialists were called in to see me, and they suggested that Vancouver's low-pressure system may be killing me and I should return to Toronto, which I did, bringing that pregnant girl with me. I continued to help her over the years and her son. Interestingly enough, she never helped me, not once. I remember her son apologizing to me that he was sorry his mother was not more grateful to me, but he was. I just shrugged and hugged him, saying, I just want you to have a better life and be happy and healthy. Yes, interesting, isn't it? How people treat you that you save their life. I also had incredible opportunities that I threw away by refusing and still don't know why. 1968, Davidson and Company wanted me to become the first woman stockbroker in North America. I refused and instead became a very sick, skinny bunny girl. I have wonderful memories of working with stockbrokers despite how sick I was. They were wonderful to me. And as you can see, I was very, very good looking. No question about it. Or I was a very good artist and my face was my canvas. Either way, I was very attractive. My brain woke up one time in the Satan's Choice coffee house who fed me coffee, not realizing how lucky I was. The man in charge took pity on me and told me I should not wander the streets by myself, saying I could have been taken hostage and shipped to Saudi Arabia as a sex slave. He made me promise to stop doing that and told me never to come back. Of course, sometimes I would be raped while catatonic, but that was usually some business pervert, never by people from the streets. There were men friends also who rescued me and took care of me to the best of their ability, too many times to count. Someone put weed into my muffins, marijuana. I can't spell it, so I call it weed. I was catatonic for 3 days. They were terrified they'd killed me. When I came to, I was in bed with their 3 children hugging me and so happy I was okay they jumped all around me. The children had apparently stayed in bed with me and prayed for me. Children's hearts are amazing. 1962, 2 very handsome, wealthy American executives with Gulf Oil wanted to rescue me and have me work for them in New York City. I met them at the Royal York working as a bunny girl. But I left there instead and went to Vancouver and then returned a few months later, as the doctors had advised. Andre and Graham flew me to New York for dinner and dancing. Again, the memory is astounding and how wonderful those 2 men treated me. They took me to the Catskill Mountains. Oh, what a glorious weekend that was. I wanted to see that very famous military academy. They picked up the phone, called some general, and took me there. It's the same place that was in a movie back in the 60s. One fell madly in love with me and pleaded with me to leave Canada. Finally, at some point, I agreed, but I only stayed a short time. I said I could not stand the prejudices that were so violent against blacks. They pleaded with me things would change, but more important, they wanted me on their payroll to get me proper medical care. They said the Canadian medical system was responsible for my disease and it was killing me. But I was just too naive and too ignorant to understand what they were trying to tell me. They kept saying that the Canadian political system is not a true democracy. It is British. And the British system is many things, but it sure as hell is not a democracy. 1969, I had my first drugged-out wedding to a man who intended to murder me. I escaped his clutches with the help of his best friend who heard his plot while he was drunk. He came to our apartment, grabbed as much of my clothes as he could, and hid me in his apartment for a few days until he found me a safe apartment miles away. I filed charges with a lawyer that if he ever came near me or did me any harm, he'd go to jail. I also told his boss what he had done, and he was warned if anything happened to me, he'd be fired. He left Toronto for Vancouver, and I was forced to wait 1 year for a divorce. Our laws are so stupid. 1970 to 78 are the years of such betrayal. I've never been able to put them down in writing. 1970, for a couple of years, I worked at Falconbridge Nickel Mines as executive secretary. They put me in their magazine. You can see I look pretty good. Yep. So I did some stuff for them. 1971, I purchased my first home and became the first woman in Ontario to own a home in her own name, outright, without the signature of a man. That was my first house on Kingsmount Park. But Fred made me sell it. He didn't like tenants while I paid all the bills. Yeah, he was a doozer. 7 years he took out of my life. It's horrible. And my second house on Dagmar, I went into paralysis and a neighbor rescued me. How did I get my house? Women weren't allowed to have a home in their own name in Ontario without the signature of a man. That was 1971. I went I went across the street to a different bank and I said I wanted $3,000 to buy furniture. I was working for a huge steel company as an executive secretary making good money for a woman, and they readily gave me the money. I took a cab back to the bank, straight out to the mortgage broker and bought the house. Then I went back to the bank, the first bank, showed it to him, and I said, "You take a better good look, buddy. Times are changing. I now own a home in Ontario in my own name, and you'd better smarten up or you're going to lose an awful lot of women clients." I took the story to the Toronto Star. They didn't want to publish it. Anyway, suffice to say, I was in and out of attacks, in and out of attacks. But in 1971, that mortgage broker, by 1980, had become my business partner and lover. And in 1980, he was in trouble financially and wanted me to take out a real estate license. I had been doing, on the side, real estate consulting to people, some for money and some for not. But with his help, I became the most successful real estate woman in Canada with Royal Trust. That was my second house on Dagmar. I had a weird way of dressing, I have to tell you. This is a sample. Every time I ate, I got sick and I'd pass out. That was dinner at a friend's, who later abandoned me. This is the story that was in the Globe and Mail when I started with Royal Trust in 1981. Now, my manager knew my history of disability, so he arranged for my disability insurance with Royal Trust so I'd not lose my homes. By now, I had 2 properties. If I became incapable of working, I purchased and the properties more as an investment to prepare myself for the worst. Both properties in time would net me millions, and the tenants would keep me from losing them, paying for the mortgages and taking care of me. I rewarded the tenants with lower rents so they could look after me best they could. So what went wrong? Well, instead of working with millionaires, which I had people begging me to do, I kept working with the poor, working class, and even helping people on welfare own a home with an apartment for rental to help pay the mortgage. I loved helping people buy a property that was not just a home but a good investment so that they would retire with more money than they ever dreamed possible. It's not that I disliked millionaires. I loved one so much, I almost married him. I dated them, hung out with them, danced and had dinner with them. My Americans would say to me, "Trudi, you're reverse prejudiced." Well, it was true in a way. I did not like Cadillacs, fancy cars, minks, and hated diamonds. I preferred cheap, fake jewelry from Woolworths. That was fun to wear. I made, created, and designed my own clothes, but when a millionaire wanted me to become a designer and put me in business on my own, I refused. I said, I don't like making designs for other people who can tell me what they want or like. I want my own creations for myself. I mean, looking back, God, I was an idiot. I don't know why I was not interested in becoming famous or wealthy. It was my dream to be a dancer on Broadway, and I almost made it. Then during a rehearsal, I took an attack, and that was the end of that dream. I just spent year after year in and out of attacks, struggling to get to my feet. And the attacks were not predictable. Sometimes I lost my legs, but not my memory. Other times the attacks caused horrific blackouts, lasting a day, a week, or a month. Yet somehow I always managed to get to my feet. If I could walk, I walked, shopping for hours for exercise. If I could dance, I would dance with anyone, anywhere, Italian clubs, Spanish, flamenco clubs, Jamaican, Trinidadian, ballroom, belly dance with the Turks, Arabs, and East Indian. And sometimes I made terrible decisions in a blackout attack from which I would scramble to recover my losses. I worked whenever I could, wherever I could, typing at night for stockbrokers, modeling for Falconbridge nickel mines, quick, easy cash as a money girl. You name it, I tried it. That announcement, my future in real estate looked guaranteed. I had the respect of thousands in the stock market, real estate market, and businessmen from all over the world. What more could a girl ask for? My future was secure with my homes, or so I believed. I had the disability Royal Trust insurance. What more did I need? I could never have imagined that one day the attack would rob me of my brain. My memory would just never return, and nothing I did could reverse the crippling, paralyzing attack. Seventh-day Adventists had been helping me stay alive for decades with their vegetarian diets, while both my doctors, Dr. Galley, a psychiatrist, and Dr. Keltz, my family doctor, ignored my plight. 1982, I was drugged and seduced into another wedding with a man criminally insane who forged my signature and ran up $48,000 in debt. Rather than lose the 2 homes for investment I had left, I made a deal with my ex-partner to get the listings on 28 of his properties, providing I gave him half of my commissions in the sale. He agreed, and I paid off the debts. Police refused to charge my pretending husband, but agreed to threaten him to get him off the property and never come near me again. 1983, I was held hostage by a demonic beast, forcing alcohol into me, repeatedly in blackouts. It would be many years before I would ever even discover he had been anal raping me, as well as beating me up. Twice, even though I had no memory of what he was doing to me, I tried to get away from him. There were witnesses to what he was doing, but they pretended I was just having nightmares and nothing was wrong. The last time I tried to leave him, my mother urged me to stay with him since I could no longer support myself, saying he really loved me. My uncle, her brother, tried to tell her what he suspected he was doing to me, but she refused to believe it. And she talked me into going back to him. I had no escape from him for 5 months. Not even the neighbors who heard my screams begging for help lifted a finger to help me. I don't know how to adequately describe in words what it is like to live in blackouts. All I know was I had to escape from this beast somehow. That was a message coming to me subconsciously, because consciously I had no memory of anything that he was doing to me. I think it's called shock. I don't know what the psychological term for it is, but I had no memory. I had complete amnesia for that 5 months. So I sold my precious home that was to be my paradise, where I was to retire in Scarborough, took what profit I had, paid off some debts, and gave him $7,000 and bought my freedom. He took the money and went to Ireland for a vacation. I prayed every day that somebody killed him when he was there, because he was a violent, violent drunk. I went back to work, but my memory was now finished. I had no recovery left. I begged my doctors to sign my Royal Trust disability, and they refused. I lost everything. My duplex was sold to cover the rest of my debts, having not been able to work for over a year. If my doctors had not been so sadistic, I would still have that home, my disability, and the tenants would have more than covered me for the rest of my life. Instead, I wound up on the streets, homeless, drowning in despair, decided to kill myself. My life was just not worth living. By March 1994, I was dying a slow and painful death and had nothing left. That's 1981 on my business partner's boat. He had owned an island, and I also did wind sailing. Yeah, I would go from crippling, and then I'd get to my feet, and I'd work like crazy, and I'd dance, and I'd ski, and anything I could do to get to my feet. And would you believe that one of my aunts actually said I was a hypochondriac? That I just wanted sympathy? That I wasn't really crippling? I was just, I won't even go there. 1983, that was my cat. Not a very good picture of her. She was my best friend for 12 years. That's a whole nother story, how she kept me alive. Yes, she kept me alive. She could talk. She could walk on a leash. The vet got mad at me one time, and he said, that cat doesn't know it's a cat. It thinks it's a person. But she did communicate to me in a very clear language. I was sick so much in those last couple of years. She would jump on my chest. She would lick my nose. and she would meow. And then she'd walk up and down, and then she'd dump onto the floor and meow, and she'd encourage me to get out of bed and make me follow her into the kitchen. And she would stand there and actually look up at the stove and meow. Well, I tried giving her a bowl of cat food, and she wouldn't eat it. And she just kept crying until I made spaghetti with meat sauce, which I always had plenty of around. And then she would go and sit by the table by my chair. And this is a true story. I'm getting a little choked up telling this. She would sit by that chair and look up at me, and she wouldn't touch the food until I ate. And when I ate, then she would eat. And I would put her a little bowl by the chair of the spaghetti. And when she was finished with the spaghetti, then she would go into the kitchen and she would eat the cat food. Now that's the truth. And when she needed to have her little basket in the bathtub of sand cleaned out, she would come and get me, and she would lead me straight to it and sit there and cry until I cleaned it. And she didn't like my having boyfriends. She was so jealous. But it was wonderful, the relationship I had with her. But I lost her, of course. I had to give her to my business partner because I became so ill that I could no longer take care of myself. This is not my house. My house was bigger than that. Much bigger property, double garage, double driveway on Osborne, Upper Beaches in Toronto. It was my pride and joy. And that was the last one I lost. The sun set like dripping blood, but it was really my blood I saw. I drove after midnight to Scarborough Bluffs, determined to drive off the cliff. 3 feet from the edge, my car came to an abrupt stop, as if by the hand of some unseen, powerful being. I was speeding at about 50 miles per hour behind a monastery. How was it possible to come to a sudden stop without killing me and driving me through the windshield? I tried to start the car, but the engine was dead. Furious, I got out of the car, sobbing, gazed at confusion at the red blood sky, and in a fury began screaming, cursing at a God I did not understand. Let me die. Let me die. And a ball of light suddenly came out of the sky and wrapped me in a pink cloud, picked me up and gently put me in the back seat of my car. As I lay there, the pink cloud seemed to wrap around me and put me to sleep. When I woke the next day, I was still determined to die, so I turned the key to check if the car would start, and it did. Then I turned it off to check the beach below, making sure it would kill me. As I got to the edge of the cliff, I heard children laughing and giggling with glee. I sat there staring down at them playing in the sand and water for a very long time. And a vision then came at that moment, making it clear to me. I had no choice. I had to live for them, for one day those children may be or have children like me, or may be like me. In that moment, I made the decision to survive and research my disease somehow. I had no idea how. I just knew that for the sake of the future generations of children, I had to try. I often drive to a beach water's edge to remind myself why I'm here, particularly when I am depressed. I loved Toronto, but now bankrupt, I was forced to leave. The fact that I could no longer write or speak beyond the level of a 5-year-old child proved not to be a hindrance in my quest. I still had a little cabin on my parents' lot in Wasaga Beach, so I loaded up my car with a few clothes and left. I had given all my furniture to the Salvation Army, who over the years, when I was homeless many times, coming out of an attack, I'd have no job, I'd have no home, they always came to my rescue, giving me furniture and clothes. So that was my way of giving back. Now, despite having no memory, I could type, and I could read with comprehension, and I could look ridiculously good. That's that model's training. And although I could read, my comprehension was impaired, but I could type. I could type anything, and I could drive my car 100%, no difficulty. My brain dysfunction affected everything else but that, including my legs. It affected. But I could drive and I could type. Communication was painfully difficult, yet I found compassion and sympathy everywhere I went in Georgian Bay District. And with their help, slowly, I began to research all disease caused by chemicals. And the name cheminosis, any disease caused by chemicals, came up in scientific journals, recorded by the Royal Society of Scientists in London, England in 1775. And I'm going to have to leave here again because it's almost an hour and I don't know how much time I have left, so I'm going to cut out now. And chapter 3 is going to be researching diseases caused by chemicals, cheminosis, 1775.